May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. We would like to welcome you to this conference that is being organized by Al Jazeera Centre for Studies in cooperation with Al Jazeera Mubasher Africa, the continent that is subject and France is the unique kind of player in many regions in Africa, particularly the ones that have been colonized, in addition to the appearance and the rise of the Russian role, in addition to the role played by Turkey, Israel, and other countries. In order to understand this kind of topic, the international competition in Africa, the motives, parties or stakeholders and dimensions, would like to welcome you to the Al Jazeera Centre for Studies conference in cooperation with Al Jazeera Mubasher. We're going to have 4 sessions convened throughout the coming 2 days. We would like to welcome our guests in the first session of today's conference. And this conference that is going to concentrate on the reasons behind such competition in Africa. We have via Skype Mr. Abdullah Raghi from Mogadishu. From Ziganchour, we have Mr. Haroun Ba from Senegal. He's got his PhD from Mohammed Al Khamis, Mohammed V University. We have from Niger our guest, and from Istanbul we have Mr. Shadi Ibrahim. We would like to welcome all our guests with us here today, and we would like to start with our conference. International competition in Africa. Would like to give the floor to Mr. Mohammed Al Mukhtar, Director of Al Jazeera Centre for Studies. The floor is yours, Dr. Mohammed Al Mukhtar Khalil. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Thank you very much. I would like to thank our colleagues in Al Jazeera Mubasher, and also I'd like to thank our colleagues from Al Jazeera Centre for Studies for this kind opportunity that gives us the chance to discuss this very important topic with the selection of distinctive speakers. It is a diverse constellation of speakers from East and West Africa, and also this is a diversity that represents different parts of Africa. So many persons have been following the different incidents that have happened in the north, in the south, in the east and west. So these incidents that persons and people have been interested in, so they reveal details that show the international competition that is taking place in the continent. So this is not a competition that is being carried out by traditional competitors such as France and other countries. We have new countries that have shown interest in Africa, such as Russia. So we have seen the role played by Russia, particularly in Libya, in Central Africa, and what has happened recently in Mali. We do not want to blow things out of proportion, but researchers, they want to reveal what is happening and to underline the new role that is being played by Russia. And we have a number of international players. We have the Turks that have tried to underline their investments in the economy and also in aviation. And also we have interest from a number of countries in Ghana, in East Africa. So the Chinese play a very important role in Eastern Africa. Also, Israel has always been present, but the way they are present in Africa is kind of implicit in certain regions and areas of Africa. And we have seen an important presence of Israel in the area. And the traits of researchers in particular, particularly the ones that we are hosting in this conference. So these researchers, they concentrate on details, on pieces of information that would reveal these details for people to be able to properly and accurately read the situation in Africa. I do not want to be lengthy, and I would like to start and welcome you to this conference. This is going to be an open conference. So the important thing is to give the opportunity to all speakers to express themselves and also to culminate into a vision that is going to be the outcome of this research. I would like to thank you and welcome you to Al Jazeera Centre for Studies and welcome you to Al Jazeera Mubasher. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad Al Mukhtar Al Khalil, Director of Al Jazeera Centre for Studies, for your opening speech for the conference that is starting tonight. We would like to start with the discussion with our guests. We'd like to talk about the importance of the geographical position of Africa. Each guest is going to be given 5 minutes to answer the question. I would like to start with Mr. Abdullah Raghi. When we talk about the geographical location of Africa, what has given Africa such an important strategic location or importance in terms of location? Thank you very much. Would like to thank Al Jazeera Network. Would like to thank Al Jazeera Mubasher for hosting us. This is a very important conference that talks about international competition, perhaps a race, international race over Africa, if we express this matter very accurately. Why Africa? Africa is very distinctive when it comes to two things. So it is the only continent amongst the 5 continents of the world, or the continents of the world in general, that is directly linked to all continents, Latin America, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, the Arab region, from the northeast area, and also it is directly linked to Australia from the southeast area. So Africa, it is the continent that links all the, or has linkages with all the other continents through the different seas, oceans, and also other areas. So Africa is one of the continents that has not used all its resources, its youth, its energies. It has not used them enough. It has not used them directly. That is why there are so many crude and primary materials when it comes to cattle, water resources, gas, uranium, gold, and oil in certain regions. So these have not been used completely. So the people of Africa have not benefited at great length from these resources and economic production. So Africa is ready to be explored in all aspects. In addition to these two dimensions, its linkage with the rest of the world, and also the different natural resources and human resources that it enjoys. Africa has recently become a market for external products, particularly products coming from Southeast Asia, from China and other countries as well. So Africa today is an area where there are conflicting hegemonies amongst countries that are competing economically. So Africa is one of the most important places or areas when it comes to the One Belt, One Road initiative, the Chinese initiative. So Africa is one of the most important stations when it comes to the One Belt, One Road initiative. So Africa is considered to be a source of threat for other countries. So that is why it has become a place of conflict between the hegemony of two powers, the Chinese and the American powers. And also we see the presence of Iran and Turkey and other countries. And also we see disparities and differences between representatives of the GCC, between the Emirates and other countries over Africa. So all conflicts are represented in the African scene. So the conflict between Turkey and France in the north, and also the conflict between other countries, all of them see a representation on African soil. So Russia that tries to go back to the international scene, and also Japan, Germany, India, all rising powers in the international scene. All of them are competing over Africa to have a place of influence or hegemony, and regions that are considered to be the backyard kind of farms, and also it is used for control and monopoly. So some countries they try to do that in Libya, in the Horn of Africa, and other areas as well. So please stay with us, Mr. Abdullah Raghi. We would like to move to our guest, Mr. Haroun Ba from Senegal, who's got a PhD in political science from Mohammed V University in Rabat. Mr. Haroun Ba would like to talk now about energy. Mr. Abdullah Raghi talks about the location of Africa and the conflicts over this location. So, what is the position of Africa in the world scene when it comes to energy? Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. Thank you for this very important chance to speak to you. I would like to thank the colleagues that are with us in this very important moment. Yes, the position or location of Africa when it comes to energy is something that is very clear indeed. And this shows the importance of Africa internationally. So, as opposed to Africa that was marginalized, that suffered from many wars, that suffered a great deal from so many conflicts and problems. But despite its weaknesses, despite its marginalization, it remains present. So when it comes to energy, we can talk about so many resources of energy. So these are important sources of energy that we cannot do without in industrial and civil activities. So we have oil, and also we have gas, and we see discoveries that happen every now and then, and also there is gas, and we have good levels and percentages of gas. Also we see there is uranium also in different African regions in the south and other regions such as the west and the north. So this is a source of energy that is very strategic and very important, and this clearly shows the competition that is happening between the different great powers over this strategic metal. There are some other metals and resources that can constitute a source of energy in Africa. And since the international game is a game of hegemony and influence, those who control this source of energy and those who control them are going to achieve some hegemony over Africa and would be able to control different parts of Africa. And as it was mentioned by the previous speaker, there are international powers, different kinds of powers, whether these are traditional countries or rising countries on African soil, all of them competing to get their share of those resources. So please stay with us. If you have anything that you would like to add, and I have a question when we talk about metals and resources, is Africa, does it benefit from its energy resources? This is a pivotal question, and here lies the problematic when it comes to Africa. A continent such as Africa, up to now, taking into account all its resources, its energies, and so on and so forth, it cannot cater for power for its own countries, we find that there are so many African countries, even capitals, they have power cuts that happen in those capitals, despite the fact that they have these resources. And this is the great problematic that we are facing in Africa, and that the leaders of the different African countries should strive to solve. We can say that recently these countries have paid heed to this problem, and they have tried and started working on this matter, particularly when it comes to international policies that are devised for sustainable development and sustainable development goals that aim to cater for the and make these energy resources available. So all these policies aim to achieve self-sufficiency for countries, peoples that are suffering, for people that are downtrodden in these areas. Would like to move now to maritime resources and metals. And metals. So, what are the maritime resources that exist in Africa, and how important are these resources for Africa and rising powers? I would like to thank you very much, and I would like to thank the different speakers and audience present with us. I hope that you can hear me clearly. No, so if you can hear me clearly, I would like to say that this is a branched out question. There are maritime resources, there are minerals. So I'm going to talk about minerals first, and after that I'm going to move to maritime resources or fisheries. So when we talk about minerals, owned by Africa. We have four kinds. The first one, we have precious stones such as uh, diamond, and also we have some precious metals such as gold that is owned by Sudan, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And France controls mines of Mali and Burkina Faso, so they do control them. And Ghana and South Africa, these mines have been controlled by Britain, but they are much more independent compared to what the situation used to be before. We have also other minerals such as copper. And also, we have some other kind of metals that are used in the making of aluminium. And China uses its own companies in order to use these resources or metal resources. And the other thing that we'd like to concentrate on is strategic minerals and metals that are used in military industries to make rockets and so on and so forth, including cobalt that is used in batteries and electronic devices, and also we have chromium that is also used. These are very, very important mineral when it comes to military industry. And when we talk about the strategic importance of these resources, these are very important resources for the future of world industries or the world of tomorrow. So this is a $1 billion map. So this is a map that was delineated in 2015 because it included a number of discoveries that is different from the map that was delineated before that date. So Africa, it is the scene where challenges have 40% of gold and 60% of cobalt and 50% of other materials that are very strategic as well. So Africa produces 40% of ruby, and there is a Swiss and a French company, and also Thailand has entered into this competition. This is very, very strategic when it comes to big companies. That are used in technology. So we have Google, Apple, Facebook, and also there is another Chinese company that is competing with Google, and We have Alibaba also that is competing with Amazon and other companies that are competing with WhatsApp and so on and so forth. So many companies are that are in competition in Africa. These are American and Chinese companies. These are giant companies that need batteries, including the making of monitors and screens. And also we have electric cars such as Tesla that need such kind of resources. So this is the important. This is how important such resources are. So African countries that produce such minerals, we can talk about something else now. How much these countries benefit from these resources and to what extent these are being useful and how this is impacting the conflicts that are taking place in Mali, in Congo, and also in Zimbabwe, Namibia, and other countries. We're going to go back to these conflicts between different great powers over these minerals, metals, and resources. So please stay with us. We would like to go to the armament market. So we'd like to welcome our guests with us here today, Mr. Shadi. So this arms race, so this is an explosive kind of barrel that increases the expenditure that is being carried out by African countries. Countries in North Africa have concluded very important military deals. So what is the level of expenditure on armament in Africa? Assalamu alaikum. I would like to thank Al Jazeera Centre for Studies. I would like to thank Dr. Mukhtar for the kind invitation. I would like to thank Al Jazeera Mubasher for us to understand the map of arms sales or deals in Africa. We have to understand 2 points. The first point is that there are military bases in a number of regions in Africa, and this is due to the strategic importance of Africa and also the interests of ex-colonizers of Africa. They have the second point is arms sales inside Africa. For us to understand this map meticulously, we need to read the resources map as it was underlined by the different speakers, and we have to read it with the other map, which is the armament map. For us to be able, we have to read them together to understand the level of benefits and the philosophy of colonial powers in Africa. There is a philosophy that dates back to the 60s of the 20th century when the French philosophy started talking about new colonialism, indirect colonialism, by reducing expenditure through the establishment of military bases and linking that to political regimes in countries where those resources or the resources of which are controlled. So when we look into those countries, we see that there are so many conflicts that date back to border delineation that, or demarcation that was carried out by those colonial powers, and this led to tribal conflicts. So they take advantage of those conflicts in order to influence and control the resources in each and every country. So France was the most important player in addition to England, and with time France started reducing the number of bases in Africa and started relying on a number of companies and militias that they support in Africa. So they used to have 100 bases and now they have 6 bases only. And they have announced recently that they're going to leave some of those bases due to the failure through uh, the conflicts and the rebels or rebellion in those countries. So to understand this map, we have to see how countries start competing. We have France, we have China, we have Russia, we have the US, and a number of European countries. So each country enters Africa and has its own philosophy. So there are interests that intersect, and sometimes there are some interests that do not intersect with each other. So that is why they try to work on their own interests in order to achieve their interests with the least cost. So, if we talk, for instance, about what has happened in Libya, what has happened in Sudan, there was a great deal of support that used to happen. So, they used to prop up a number of forces, such as the Sudanese Liberation Army. Also, they moved to Libya, and this all happened within a framework that entailed that they want to make the regional policies of certain countries successful. So we find weapons in countries such as Ukraine, Korea, and Iran and Russia. All of them have started entering into Africa, and they have started catering for the rebel groups, giving them weapons, trying to use them for their own interests, and each country would start expanding its influence, its hegemony, by selling weapons in those African countries for them to guarantee the continuation of their hegemony. So we have started having a number of security companies. There are some private security companies and some military companies. So the private security companies, they have a specific role, such as guarding certain embassies and so on and so forth. But the military companies, they carry out trainings and also they serve some political powers within African countries. So they are kind of contractors, private contractors, in order to serve the former colonial powers. And there are so many examples of such countries that work in Africa. Thank you very much, Mr. Shadi. We're going to continue with these components that you talked about, but please stay with us.
We will move to the second part of our discussion later. I go back to our colleague, Mr. Raghi, to talk about the geographic location of Africa. How beneficial was it, and what were the disadvantages? 4 minutes, please. This is an excellent question. Africa actually suffers, in my opinion, more than it benefits from its geographic location. Of course, the colonial forces occupied territories, and since the 60s, there was a failure in Africa to come up with a development project to serve the African people. For instance, in a country like Djibouti, which is in the African Horn, we have a model that is highly with high density or very concentrated image regarding this competition over Africa. We have this state and the African Horn area. So we're talking about 200 million uh, people living in the African Horn, and it is projected to reach, the population is projected to reach 1 billion in this region, and also it is a great trade area. We're talking about Bab el Mandab Strait and linking the Indian Ocean and the Arab Sea. So it's a small country that has approximately 10 military bases for uh, colonial powers, and the Italy and France were the colonial forces of or in Djibouti, and also Britain that was part of the EU, and now it is looking to set foot in Somalia, and also other places. The previous colonial powers are less active than the US, China, and Russia, and the emerging countries, for instance, Germany, Japan, are more active. Japan, for instance, is far away when it comes to geography. The country is overlooking this region. They have 20 bases approximately. There, it is said that in Eritrea there is an Israeli base. There are three problems in common: the lack of domestic stability, the crisis of rebuilding the state in Somalia, also the issue of North Somalia, and also Tigray and Ethiopia issue. We also have the social class problem in Djibouti and Kenya, the tribal and civil war in South Sudan, also the crisis of power in Sudan and the legitimacy of the authorities. So there are crises in this region, and this region is not enjoying development or political stability. To a certain extent, Somaliland and Kenya enjoy a certain level of stability because they are on the Red Sea. There are no strategic partnerships with major countries in order to rely on them when it comes to development. So the Africans lost when it comes to their wealth, to their sovereignty, and their strategic location. For instance, if we have one day a world war between the superpowers, the areas to be used are a country like Djibouti, for instance, hosting approximately 10 bases, or Eritrea and Somalia. All these countries did not benefit from the money coming from the bases, nor did they benefit from economic arrangements with countries like Turkey running the ports of Mogadishu or Berbera in Somaliland and Bosaso in the province, and also China had the Road and Belt Initiative in the region. So Kenya, Somalia, Djibouti, they are all part of this initiative, but they did not benefit when it comes to the strategic location of these countries. And the major countries like China, US, and France are benefiting. Mr. Abdullah Raghi confirmed that the Africans lost. Mr. Harun Ba might have a different opinion regarding the issue of energy. What are the main challenges in the area of energy? 4 minutes, please. My colleague, thank you. My colleague mentioned some of these problems, and also we can talk about the crisis that Africa witnessed. For instance, when we talk about challenges and problems that countries in Africa face when it comes to the energy sector, they are relating to the building of a state. Uh, the lack of this concept is the result that we are seeing today, and this is the framework of the political and social and energy dimensions in these countries. There's also another crisis, which is the crisis of funding, and these two crises are intertwined. For instance, the countries that were colonized by France, if we take them into account, 65% of their wealth and assets are in the treasury of France. So the budget, the finances of these countries have been exploited, and this is the problem of financing and funding. And this brings us to the problems that Africa is facing when it comes to the energy sector. So, although uh, Africa has energy resources, the African countries cannot use them to the benefit of their people. And also, the Cold War, if we go back to the Cold War, we notice that starting the 90s, so the 3 decades before the 90s were lost decades, so to speak. Every each and every country was living under the umbrella of the former colonial power. Now, in today's world, there is new initiatives from China that were mentioned, and there might be some sort of recovery when it comes to the financing, but this does not save the African continent from the dependency problem. So there is some sort of dependency because Africa cannot be self sufficient, and my colleague talked about the conflicts, the civil war, and unfortunately, 60 years after independence, some countries still fear the region and the area's conflicts. This is also a crisis. So, this assimilation did not take place in order for the countries to benefit from the energy and from the assets. Also, the bad governance is actually something that we can talk about, and it leads to the loss of approximately 40% of agricultural revenues. Why? Because there is no energy or power that allow the African countries to benefit from the agriculture. So there are structural problems that are still ongoing, and should they go unsolved, we cannot basically see Africa benefiting from its resources. The resources will be looted by mega powers. Please stay with us, Dr. Ba. I go back to the mineral and maritime resources. Mr. Ayat, so we're talking about 95% of the world's diamond, and also the gold, uh, and the reserves. We have 50% and 95% of the diamonds and 70% of the world's gold. So the competition regarding strategic minerals and maritime resources between the superpowers, what can you tell us about it and its dimensions? It is a very key question. This competition between superpowers is divided into 2 dimensions. The first dimension is the competition between the superpowers, and the second dimension is the competition between local powers that try to work in the mines, and the mines that deal with the companies directly. So this is how they are used. And the third point is that the corporations, the multinationals, and the Western companies, in addition to Israel that intervened at the later stage, they invest in alliances. And these alliances by some government, particularly some Asian governments, China or India, for instance. So they deal with governments as opposed to how they deal with Western countries. Because when it comes to Western countries, the companies and corporations from Western companies or from Western countries, sorry, come to Africa, and here, for instance, uh, there can be some cooperation from political parties. In 2018, International Advocacy White was an international organization uh, filed a lawsuit in the United States against big technological companies regarding the abuses in Congo. Apple, Google, Tesla, Dell, and Microsoft. These companies are in harsh competition with their Chinese counterparts, and they carried out some violations and cooperated with warlords in Congo, and this has led to the death of children less than 16 years of age, and there was a total silence at the level of the worldwide media, and even the Chinese company wanted to liberate the African countries from Western companies, especially from former colonial powers. But they established alliances with governments and some uh, parties that control the black market in Congo. So, one of the dimensions of this competition is that when China wanted to break this monopoly of Western companies, they cooperated with the Prime Minister, and then the Prime Minister or the government uh, put an end to the license of the Chinese company and then cooperated at a later stage with Swiss and uh, Belgian companies. In addition to that, the price of cobalt increased to higher levels, which led to internal conflict in Congo. And Burundi, for instance, the same thing happened. In 2015, huge quantities of uh, mineral. So it has 16 chemical elements, and it has electromagnetic characteristics, and it is used in renewable energy and refineries, and also the engines of airplanes. So China controls 90% of the resources and export 10%. In 2015, when it was discovered in Burundi, the former colonial power Belgium wanted to control it, but the late president gave the license to China. Therefore, since 2016, there was an internal conflict between the internal powers in this country. In Central Africa, there's also competition between France on the one hand and Russia on the other. The French forces control even the presidential palace, and they control the diamond mines, the Russians. So we can see this in Sudan and also in Mali. In Mali, the gold was controlled by France, and then Russia intervened. Israel intervened as well in Kenya. There is a billionaire that is who is being investigated in the United States for offering bribe to the president, and these are just minor examples regarding the situation in Africa and the repercussions on the local population and the conflicts that erupted in Africa, and the minerals become cheaper, and this does not help the development of the African continent. Mr. Idris, so you talked about corruption and also the corruption of rulers, and you are responsible for this information. So, Mr. Shadi Ibrahim, question to you now. how do superpowers arm rebel groups in Africa? How do they provide them with weapons? And what about the military spending in Africa? What can you tell us about these expenditures? If we go back to the arms, the size of armed deals and the armed exports to African countries, so mainly Russia is number one, from 7 billion since 2000, and now we have approximately 16 billion US dollars. France was 4 billion in 2000, now it is approximately 8 billion. The United States between 4 to 5 billion, China 1 billion, in addition to other countries that play behind the scenes by supporting rebel groups. So I'm talking about the report that relies mainly on the public deals. But if we talk about contractors and security companies, we see that there are large sums of money paid to factories in Ukraine, France, Brazil, other countries, and then uh, weapons or light weapons are exported, and those weapons can be used during conflicts in Africa. In order to understand the scene, we need to see the countries to give political cover to some rebel groups. At the level of the European Union, some parties highlighted the human rights dossier with African leaders. So China intervened and said we want to build infrastructure, but we do not want to open human rights dossiers. So France and the EU were killed millions of people and committed many crimes, but they use Africa not only as an arms market, but also to trade and also to experiment weapons. So, for instance, France experimented with weapons in Algeria, in the desert, and the African countries did not ask for compensation and did not investigate these cases. Israel, for instance, the uh, leader of the Sudan Liberation Army was given an office in Israel, sending light weapons to South Sudan, and eventually they want to control the oil resources and mines at the service of multinationals and mega companies in order to, or as part of this competition between the West and China. So we're talking about mainly rebel groups, and they implement the policy of the parties who pay more, and they rely on political support and weapons. We need to understand something: the concept of China when it comes to infrastructure. This initiative is not at the service of the people and the development of the state, but at the service of the strategic energy needs of China and the strategic position of China in Africa and the world. But nobody cares about the African people. Therefore, any conflict that you see in Africa, regarding any conflict, you need to look into colonial forces. For instance, regarding the Renaissance Dam problem, if we go back to the main study, uh, so the choice of the location was made by the US and Israel in the 60s during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. Therefore, the roots of any problem in the region in Africa is directly relating to these colonial powers. Contractors are being used to protect regimes, that are supported at the political level and given legitimacy in order to control the resources of the country. Even if we talk about the social construct of the African countries, we always notice that 60 to 80% of the population is poor, and uh, limited minority controls the power and the wealth of the country. Therefore, the situation in Africa is unstable and fluctuates constantly. The president of Chad was assassinated a few months ago during the war with the rebel groups. In Mali, there is a military coup. Even military coup in Africa, when there are coup, the EU and the United States do not intervene, and we see these issues being used in the media, but on the ground we see plans and competition in order to control the resources of Africa. Thank you, Mr. Shadi. Well, let us talk about the difficult circumstances surrounding the mineral resources, talking about the maritime resources, even the arms market. Let us go back to the geographic location with Mr. Abdullah Raghi. How can Africa benefit from its location? 3 minutes, please. Thank you. This is an impossible question to answer because we have, for instance, the African Union and other bodies bringing together the countries of the continent. For instance, also we have the ECOWAS and the uh, Moroccan Union, and we have also the African Horn organization. All these organizations failed in two main areas. The first one is to manage the conflicts and border disputes between the member countries. For instance, we have the GERD problem between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. So the African bodies could not come up with an early solution before this problem turned into a crisis, and the crisis was internationalized with the participation of superpowers. For instance, Russia signed a military agreement with Ethiopia a couple of days ago, and the former US president said once that he would accept, so it seemed, a military strike from Egypt. We have also Sudan and Kenya, Djibouti and Eritrea, etc. So the intra-African crises cannot be solved by African countries within the African regional organizations. In addition to that, we have domestic crises when it comes to the legitimacy of power, the demography, and economy and development. All these questions are intertwined, and they can be linked with the regional and international competition that is not isolated from the intra-African crises and problems between the regions, the different countries. So the Maghreb Union, for instance, is a body that needs to deal with the uh, issues of the Maghreb area, but the African continent is not capable of finding solutions to these problems. So These countries need to find solutions to the issues of democracy, development, and regional cooperation between them in order to find larger solutions at the level of the continent. One of our colleagues talked about the problem of financing or funding development projects in Africa. We do not have self financing. The African Bank does not provide what the continent needs. And also, we have the loans. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have their models, and these models take the countries back to poverty. And the last model is the Chinese model, just like our colleague from Istanbul mentioned. It focuses on infrastructure, but uh, this model has a structural issue, which is the dependence on foreign loans. So, all these things can be related to the conflict between the tribes and the civil wars and the confrontations between the different clans, and these are reflected regionally and internationally when it comes to seeking funding for main development projects or finding solution to regional crisis, or talking about the security and democracy within states. So the intra-African cooperation is capable of protecting the continent and benefiting from its resources. Thank you. Please stay with us, sir. Mr. Harumba, when talking about energy, there's a room to talk about prospects and future opportunities. What opportunities does Africa have, particularly when it comes to clean and green energy? And this is a promising area for Africa. 3 minutes, please. Thank you. First and foremost, in order to talk about the future of Africa, I would like to start by saying two things. According to my understanding, things need to change, will change, and there are indicators that things will change indeed. And the two factors that tell me that things will change in the future. First is the demographic factor. The youth forms 65% of the population of Africa, so more than a third of the population, or two-thirds of the population. So the youth cannot remain silent vis-a-vis corruption and the bad governance, in addition to other problems in Africa. In addition to that, the pressing needs, the relating to the livelihoods of the people. So these are the two factors that will eventually lead to a change and reform of some sort. And for instance, we can see this when it comes to presidential mandate and also or the presidential term, and the good governance and democracy. When we shift towards reforms, we can then talk about benefiting from the resources and the future of Africa. But if Africa cannot overcome the problems from the colonial area, Africa will not be capable of building a future. So there should be a rupture with this widespread corruption all over the continent and the widespread bad governance and the failed states and regimes and elite that ruled for decades. So when we have this rupture, we can talk about a promising future. So I count first and foremost on change and on reforms and having success stories when it comes to benefiting from energy. And also we have Morocco, for instance, and South Africa and Ghana and other countries. There are good initiatives and good models when it comes to the field of energy, but these models cannot be counted on in this context of crises in Africa. So the most important thing is to build a state that is capable of fulfilling the needs of the people and achieving sovereignty and rupture with the West. So building an African country fulfilling the needs of the people of Africa. Thank you, Mr. Harumba. We go back to the minerals and maritime resources. Mr. Idris Ayad, what are the repercussions of this competition on the security, the economic security and political security of Africa?
So before I answer your question, I would like to express my disagreement with the previous panelists when it comes to the future of the African continent, particularly that the title of this conference is Competition over Africa. I am optimistic, and I do say that this competition is useful for Africa. So the Middle East has always been the scene of conflict during the Cold War, and now this competition over Africa is the new Cold War that is happening in Africa. So the scene is Africa over resources, over energy, over the prevailing powers. A month ago, the Russian President Putin told his people that we are moving to Africa, and this is no coincidence. We're moving there because of their resources. It is a very important continent. So now we are moving into multipolar competition. It is no longer the competition that happens between one continent and one country, or one country and one country, sorry, two countries over one continent. So I have one example from Mali when there was a crisis between Mali and France. After 3 days, they have seen that myth- yeah. We have seen that lithium batteries have been provided by China to Africa. So now governments are smart, they can compete and they can invest in such competition. The African continent is no longer as it used to be during the Cold War. We live in a globalized world. There are so many developments that are happening. So this is my position when it comes to this competition and the dimensions of what has been covered in this conference. So we live in a changing world and we have the power transition theory. This is a political science theory. So there are so many powers such as Russia, Turkey, China, and Israel. And also we have the GCC powers such as the Emirates on the one hand, Qatar on the other hand, and also Saudi Arabia. And the Emirates has investments in the mining sector, and the same applies to Saudi Arabia and to a lesser extent Qatar. So these are some forecasts when it comes to the future. Yes, this competition is good for Africa, and we are entering into a new changing world, and this is very important. And I would like to move to the second part, and this is going to be very short. So what is the impact on the economy? So there are so many countries that do not have an infrastructure. So Western companies, when they come and they conclude contracts with African companies, when they start with the infrastructure. And when they conclude contracts with the Russians and the Chinese, it is the Chinese and the Russians who pay for those contracts, as opposed to European countries who do not pay the contracts. It is the government that pays the contract, and this has happened in Zimbabwe and Burundi. So the map shows the different precious stones and minerals and how negotiations can happen and how contracts can be concluded with different external powers. So this is how I see the dimensions of this competition. Mr. Idris Ayat, since you talked about optimism in the future, or being optimistic about the future, so I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Shadi Ibrahim, talking about weapons and security, private security companies, mercenaries in Africa. How do you assess the situation of private security companies and foreign mercenaries? There are approximately 50 military and security companies in Africa. They follow the security apparatuses in the different countries. But those who pay the price at the end of the day is the peoples of those African countries that have been waned by those colonial powers, and behind them the political elites that rule those countries. When we talk about competition, we do not talk about competition within the framework of cooperation. On the contrary, we talk about competition within a framework of influence and hegemony, because this is not something that is useful, because who pays the price is the people themselves. Villages are wiped out, people are killed through these military countries that have come to power, elite that have come to power through military coup. So at the end of the day, it is the African citizen who pays the price. It is the African people who pay the price. So when we talk about hope, we talk about the people who should decide about their future, and not the colonial powers or the military or security companies that follow those countries. So the solution first is that these countries should regain their political will when it comes to ruling their countries and controlling their resources and setting the plans within a framework of cooperation inside Africa or the regional powers within Africa. Talking about the changes in the demographic they makeup in Africa, in excess of 60 countries have the population which is most of the African countries, 60% of their population is below the age of 30. So these people, they communicate through social media, they monitor experiences happening in other countries, and what has happened during the Arab Spring in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya is testament to the fact that there is communication between countries, between people. So such communication is not known or not easy to know by those regimes. These regimes, they used to prevail through their own discourse that is no longer valid. So that is why we're going to witness in the coming phase a change movement similar to the liberation movement that took place in Africa. So this starts by the people because they want to regain the upper hand on their own resources. So that is why we're going to see good competition and not conflicts that the African citizen would of which the African citizen would pay the price. We'd like to thank our dear guests for being with us. We'd like to thank you, Mr. Shadi. We'd like to thank you for being with us. We'd like to thank Al Jazeera Centre for Studies for their cooperation with Al Jazeera Mubasher. And this is the theme of our conference, which is international competition in Africa, motives, parties or stakeholders, and dimensions. I would like to thank Mr. Raghi. Thank you so much for being with us. I would like also to thank our guest, Mr. Harumba. Thank you very much for being with us. I would like to thank Mr. Idris Ayat from Niger, and I would like to thank Mr. Shadi Ibrahim. I would like to thank Dr. Muhammad Khalil Mukhtar, who was with us as well in this segment. So we have come to the end of the first session. So we're going to reconvene again in the second session to continue with the different themes of our conference. So please stay with us.